Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 12th of December 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. And what's happening, Mike? Chaos, utter chaos in Westminster.
Absolutely. It began this morning with this.
Sir Graham Brady has confirmed that he has received 48 letters from Conservative MPs, so there will now be a vote of confidence in my leadership of the Conservative Party. I will contest that vote with everything I've got. And at this crucial moment in our history, that means securing a Brexit deal that delivers on the result of the EU referendum, taking back control of our borders, laws and money, but protecting jobs, our security and our precious union as we do so. A change of leadership in the Conservative Party now will put our country's future at risk and create uncertainty when we can least afford it. A new leader wouldn't be in place by the 21st of January legal deadline, so a leadership election risks handing control of the Brexit negotiations to opposition MPs in Parliament. The new leader wouldn't have time to renegotiate a withdrawal agreement and get the legislation through Parliament by the 29th of March, so one of their first acts would have to be extending or rescinding Article 50, delaying or even stopping Brexit.
So there you go, delaying or even stopping Brexit. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that she said there, and so I'm not really going to apologise to everybody for playing that this morning, but she mentioned protecting our precious union. And of course, if you asked the average journalist what that meant, they would tell you that she was talking about the United Kingdom, the Union of the United Kingdom. But of course, she's talking about her precious union, the European Union. That's what she wants to protect. And Theresa May was always a Remainer. So anyway, a vote of no confidence tonight. Well, if she loses that, then as David Gauke, the Justice Secretary, says, Article 50 would have to be delayed if the vote goes against Theresa May this evening. At the least, it would have to be delayed, but of course we've had the European Court of Justice response judgment saying that, well, in fact, it's no problem. We can just rescind the Article 50 process and go back to where we were. So it remains to be seen how that pans out. Now, I just wanted to run through a quick timetable here of how things will go. So 13th, 14th of December, tomorrow, there's an EU summit. This is the EU 27. That's without the United Kingdom taking part. They're going to discuss Brexit. Donald Tusk has already said we will not renegotiate the deal, including the backstop, but we are ready to discuss how to facilitate UK ratification. Of course, there's nothing they can do to facilitate UK ratification while the backstop remains. That apparently is the sticking point at the moment, but anyway, we move on. Theresa May there mentioned the 21st of January because on that date MPs are then able to influence the Brexit process if there's no vote in favour of a withdrawal agreement or her withdrawal agreement, and she's basically making a threat that perhaps Labour MPs could get involved in the Brexit process. Then the 21st, 22nd of March, there is an EU summit. This is the final summit possibly that the UK is going to take part in as a member of the European Union. Okay, that's what they say. And then some point before the 29th of March, Parliament has to pass the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill, which has, if it has been approved by then, and of course there's not much chance of that happening because if Theresa May loses the vote of no confidence tonight, that will start a process of finding a new leader for the Tory party, which is going to be at least 6 weeks, but then we've got the Christmas break going on in the meantime, so how long is that going to be? And then the 29th of March itself, the UK, well, I've put that in inverted commas, leaves the EU unless the date is delayed or unless Article 50 is revoked. And then this is the key one, the 23rd to the 26th of May, elections for the European Parliament will take place in the EU 27 countries. The UK will no longer be represented in the Parliament. So at that point, assuming that everything goes ahead and there is some kind of Brexit, in inverted commas, because it's not really Brexit, the point is that we will not have any members of the European Parliament anymore. And as David Ellis has been making the point, this potentially leaves us open to the prospect of taxation without representation. We'll come on to why that's important in a second, because here's the key point. If we look at Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, of course, it's all focusing on certain things, customs union, single market, all this kind of stuff. But there's almost no mention, no substantive mention of security and defence in that agreement. And if we go back even to 2016, when the Best of Both Worlds document was released by Cameron, if you remember, he was saying that they had secured a new settlement to give the United Kingdom special status in the European Union. Well, that document has no mention of security and defence either. The key point here is defence is not part of Brexit. It has not been part of Brexit from the beginning of the process. It is not part of Brexit. And so again, when Theresa May said in her briefing this morning that she has been aiming to protect European security, this is what she means. Defence is not part of Brexit. We are going to remain inside the EU with respect to defence. So Theresa May was in Brussels yesterday, of course, to meet some leaders to discuss the situation and see what might be done. It seems that nothing was able to be achieved yesterday. But anyway, in parallel with that, Federica Mogherini was speaking in the European Parliament. So let's have a listen to what she was saying.
I think we all agree that no single European country can respond effectively to any of the challenges of our times. And I think we agree that we, the European Union, have a responsibility to embrace our role as a global power, working together for peace, security and human development worldwide, and in some cases, even filling a gap. Let me say this very clearly. I believe there is no contradiction at all between European interests and national interests, in particular in this field. The European Union is the most powerful instrument we have as Europeans to serve our national interests on the global scene. None of our member states is big enough, in the world of today, to pursue their own national interest all alone. And this is why some in the world might cherish divisions among us. It might be in their interest, but never in ours. When we join forces as Europeans and take part in global negotiations, we are not giving up on our sovereignty. On the contrary, we are exerting our sovereignty more fully, more powerfully on the global stage. When we send a military mission abroad, it is to save lives, it is to protect peace, or to help rebuild a country. When we invest in military capabilities, it is to defend our citizens from attacks, or to put the best technologies to the service of peace. Yes, we are investing in Europe's hard power, finally, and we would all prefer that we lived in a world where this was not necessary. But our work on defence is always, always, and will always be at the service of peace.
At the service of peace, Brian.
Yeah, at the service of peace. Let's just bring in this next comment, and then we can talk about what she's actually said there. But as you were playing this clip and we were preparing for the news, this came into my head, the quote, "The aggressor is always peace-loving. He would prefer to take over our country unopposed. To prevent his doing this, we must both be willing and prepared to make war." Clausewitz. So this is the quote about the aggressor being peace-loving, and Mogherini there, peace, this is for defence, this is protection. Where did this quote come from? Well, it was actually written evidence submitted by a gentleman called Christopher Donnelly. Now, maybe some viewers listeners won't remember that name. We just remind them that this is the man linked into the Institute of Statecraft. And of course, he was a long-term advisor to NATO. They're moving towards war. The people who are saying, no, we're only dealing in defence. Trust us. This is the best interest of for you as a nation state. These are the people that are moving towards war. There's no question of it. But what they're saying to the public, of course, is absolute spin and lies. What they do with the left hand, complete opposite with the right hand.
Absolutely. Now, on Monday, of course, we were talking about the Yellow Vest protests, and we mentioned these vehicles being driven around, and this one in particular with the EU badge on the side. And the point we were making was that, of course, part of EU military unification is about civilian action, and we were highlighting the existence of the European Gendarmerie Force. We were highlighting the fact that NATO had been assigned non-lethal weapons, and somebody making the point that if you put a non-lethal weapon in the hand of a military man, does that make him some kind of militarized police? And that's absolutely the case, as we were making the point that this goes back to 2015 to the European Defence Matters Conference, the European Defence Agency Conference, and what Mogherini and Stoltenberg had been expressing at that point. We need to merge military and policing functions. So I just want to show a little bit more of Federica Mogherini's speech to the European Parliament yesterday, because it fits in with this very well.
This is why it is so important to strengthen it these times. It is also for this reason that I wanted a new compact on civilian missions to be an integral part of our work on a Europe of defence. I talked about this in this hemicycle exactly 1 year ago, and last month the Council has approved our civilian CSDP compact. We now want to expand our civilian action even more, with new capacities and shorter reaction time. The PASCO report calls for closer cooperation between our civilian and military initiatives. I totally agree with this, and it is one of the goals that we want to achieve with the civilian compact and with the reform of our command structures in Brussels. Our two command centres, civilian and military, will work now more closely together.
So, Brian, that's pretty clear. Now, at the moment, of course, what she's talking about is European external action, foreign policy in effect. So she's talking about policing actions in Afghanistan or Mali or Ukraine. But there's nothing that I have seen so far which prevents this merging of civilian and military capability from being deployed on the streets. And as we'll come on to in a second when we talk about the Strasbourg incident, what's absolutely clear, of course, and as Patrick mentioned on Monday, Operation Temper in this country, the French have a similar situation where the police and the military are being deployed together. This should be cause for concern.
Major cause for concern. It's so unbelievably dangerous, and all this is happening under the smokescreen of Brexit. So Theresa May, the Conservatives, leave means leave EU. Nobody is talking about defence and the fact that Britain's military, this is tri-service, research and development, nuclear, everything to do with UK's defence is simply being locked even further into the European Union as the European Union locks defence into civilian policing. This is immensely dangerous. We've effectively, well, not effectively, we've got a dictatorship forming here. And of course, in France, we've already got the crisis coming into being. We've banned protest on the streets in France. So we've got shutdown. We just need a slightly bigger crisis. And Europe can, of course, say that it needs to have full military civilian mobilisation and your martial law. That is it.
And in the meantime, of course, the chaos continues from a constitutional point of view in this country. Well, looking at some of the images of Theresa May in Brussels yesterday, there she was with Ollie Robbins. And of course, a key problem here has been the fact that Theresa May has effectively sidelined Parliament in everything that she's done. The entire Brexit proposal that she has come up with has been architected by Ollie Robbins in the Cabinet Office, and the Cabinet Office has been driving British policy for quite some time now, in complete subversion of the democratic process. So at Prime Minister's Questions Time today, I just wanted to show Jeremy Corbyn's response to this, because I think this is maybe the first time that I've seen him actually angry.
Totally and absolutely unacceptable to this House in any way. This House agreed a programme motion. Yes. This House agreed the 5 days of debate. This House agreed when the vote was going to take place. The government tried to unilaterally pull that and deny this House the chance of a vote on this crucial matter. The Prime Minister and her government have already been found to be in contempt of Parliament. Her behaviour today is just contemptuous of this Parliament and of this process. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's appalling behaviour needs to be held to account by this House, as indeed the people of this country are more and more concerned about the ongoing chaos at the centre of her government.
And as much as it pains me to say that he's right, she does need to be held to account for this, because she is behaving like a dictator.
That's absolutely correct, Mike. But what are we watching here? We're watching theatre, we're watching pantomime, because this is for the public consumption. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, everything continues apace. That's business as usual with the European Union. And we are now so close to losing control over our defences, over Her Majesty's armed forces. Let's just put that little term in there. It is nearly gone whilst we watch this theatre in Parliament. So let's just take our minds back to July, and thank you very much for the viewer that alerted us to this document, the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Let's bring in the second page is here. So this is the statement from the government, and let's get into what Theresa May had to say. She said in the referendum on the 23rd of June 2016, the largest ever democratic exercise in the United Kingdom, the British people voted to leave the European Union, and that is what we will do, leaving the single market and the customs union, ending free movement and the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in this country, leaving the common agricultural policy and the common fishery policy, and ending the days of sending vast sums of money to the EU every year. We will take back control of our money, laws and borders, and begin a new exciting chapter in our nation's history. That's what she told the public. That was a lie, Mike, because behind the scenes, what has been engineered is this deliberate pantomime of breakdown and chaos, because this confuses the average person in the street as to what's really going on. But behind the scenes, everything with the European Union and Britain's relationship in the European Union is carrying on as normal. And we just come back to emphasize this. This is another document or article sent through to us, Warfare Today, and it's making a statement. The British Army has stated that there's a requirement to enhance support to NATO and to strengthen ties with our European allies. We're not coming out, we're strengthening the ties. We're committed to a combined river crossing capability with the German army, known as the M3 wide wet gap crossing capability. But it goes on to say that the British Army's M3 wide wet gap crossing capability is delivered by a 23 amphibious engineer troop and a 412 amphibious engineer troop, 75 engineer regiment. And it says here both units move from Hamelin to Minden to share facilities with their Bundeswehr counterparts. So this is not disengaging British military from the European Union. We are fully unifying our structure with Europe, and this is not being debated at all with regard to Brexit or anything that Theresa May is saying. Now, I can't say whether this is a British military vehicle or not, but this is one of the images from that article. And of course, here we see the European Union flag on the vehicle. Absolutely nothing being talked about to do with defence, and it is defence with security. When the European Union is talking defence, they mean with civilian security fully integrated. Nothing is being talked about in Parliament. And I can say that UK Column has now been told from several sources in and close to Westminster that MPs are now being whipped to remain silent on the issue of EU military unification. So if you want to know why nobody's talking about it, because we've now got to the stage where the whips on both sides, so Conservative and Labour, are threatening MPs that they're going to be dealt with if they dare to mention the subject of defence. So the British public might be being deceived yet again.
But the British public would not have been deceived if they had been paying attention to the UK Column News programme on the day after the referendum. I just thought it was appropriate to play a few seconds of the introduction to that programme. let's have a listen to this.
Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 24th of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Well, of course, it's Friday, and that means the result is out. And of course, the result was a very clear leave vote. Consequently, the sun is shining in Plymouth. What we would like to say to people is, whilst, of course, the result has brought a lot of happiness and joy to many individuals, we think it's the start of the real battle, and it's absolutely vital that people realise that this government is not simply going to roll over and allow Britain to take back its sovereignty as a nation state. We are very confident that what follows from here on is going to be a very dark picture as the government delays, stalls and obfuscates in order to make sure this decision can be reversed.
So that was the day after the referendum, Brian?
Well, it was called, and you were the first one to call it, Mike, but we had that discussion on the day and we said, do we believe this? We did believe it, so we broadcast that and we've been proved absolutely correct. Of course, we've had a few sneers and comments from the sidelines, a few clearly misguided Irish channels, I think, had a go at us and said we were completely wrong. Well, we can stand here or sit here today saying we have been absolutely 100% correct. And if the British public don't pick up on this fact that Theresa May is lying to the public because our defence and security is being left behind in the European Union, then we will not have a nation state. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds. I just wanted, we'll bring this one in. No news for Friday. We will transmit a news tomorrow. So
we'll be live at 1 p.m. as usual tomorrow instead of Friday, because Brian and I have something else that we've got to do on Friday. But we didn't want to skip the news programme this week, so we will do a live news programme tomorrow.
Okay, now let's just see if we can do this. We've jumped back to this one. I just wanted to bring this on screen. This is from the document that I've just quoted from about how we were going to break away from the European Union. But as part of it, paragraph 171 said this, and I've said, remember that while Theresa May is saying this, we can't fix the potholes in the road. So Theresa May said, taken together, the UK's independent trade policy will ensure the UK is ready for the opportunities and challenges presented by the global mega trends, industrialisation and urbanisation in emerging economies, the rise of disruptive technologies in all sectors, a radical demographic transformation across the world, and greater, deeper and quicker global interconnectedness. The UK will be agile enough to provide thought leadership on the shape and design of new global rules for new and disruptive technologies. Now, many people will look at that or listen to that and say, what on earth is this lady talking about? It sounds nonsense, but in fact, if you get into the terminology and you look at the references to sort of McKinsey and other consultants that have clearly helped draft this material, this is about creation of the rules-based international order. Theresa May boasting that she can't fix the potholes in the roads, but trust her because she's going to help transform the world under this new rules-based international order. To say this is bunker mentality, Mike, I think is an insult to the Reich, because it's clear that in Theresa May's mind, reality departed long ago, I think.
Okay, let's move on to Strasbourg. And RT had this article today, Total Mobilisation. Strasbourg bans public demos amid massive manhunt for Christmas market gunmen. Of course, this is, well, I think the total is 3 people dead so far, a number of people injured. And they're saying with a major operation underway to find the suspect, France has raised its threat level and introduced extra security and border controls, as well as a ban on public assemblies in Strasbourg following the Christmas market attack. The city of Strasbourg was subject to a reinforced grid, French Interior Minister Christophe Castanet said on Tuesday night. Hours after the attack on the market left 3 people dead and 13 others injured, and so on. So the people that were attacked, or the attack seemed to be on military personnel that were patrolling the streets under Operation Sentinel. And this is equivalent to Operation Temper in the UK. And in this case, in the French case, they've got 10,000 soldiers and 4,700 police and gendarmes deployed. That was in January 2015. I'm sure those numbers have risen since then. And as I say, this gunman reportedly shot at soldiers patrolling as part of that operation. And this is the document then. It says that all assemblies, either stationary or as a march, are banned until the order is rescinded. Anyone in breach of the order will be subject to the penalties provided for by law. So they're going to deploy additional resources on the streets, which I guess means more military, more police. But in the meantime, no possibility for the Yellow Vests, Brian, unless they want to risk whatever penalties provided by law may be. Yeah. So in the meantime then, the war pressure continues, and here's Petro Poroshenko. Apologies, I got a typo on that. Must make it fake news, but anyway, here we go. So Ukrainian President Poroshenko has signed the termination of the 1997 Treaty of Friendship between Ukraine and Russia, and that termination will take effect on the 1st of April 2019. He said we must regard the prolongation of our agreement with Russia not as an episode, but as part of our strategy towards the final breakup with our colonial past and reorientation towards Europe. The other components of this strategy are as follows: a visa-free regime, an agreement on the association with the EU, the Tomos Decree on the creation of an independent church in Ukraine, the discontinuance of our membership of the Commonwealth of Independent States, that's the Russian Commonwealth of Independent States, the mentioning of our aspirations to join the EU and NATO in the Ukrainian constitution, the creation of a professional Ukrainian army, the support of the Ukrainian language, our own history, and the strengthening of our national identity. We will continue to assess the utility of various agreements between Kiev and Moscow, and they'll be scrapped as well if necessary. But this is a pretty major step, Brian. And just by coincidence then, Poroshenko will be meeting Jens Stoltenberg at NATO tomorrow. Just a coincidence.
Well, I'm going to say, of course, it's not a coincidence. What will have happened is that he will have been told that he has to show commitment to the European empire, as it's European Union empire, as it now declares itself, and you can't really have an ongoing agreement with Russia and be friends of the European empire. So you need to scrap that agreement, and then we can come in and give you some full support from the power of the empire. Remember that the use of the word empire is not UK column words. This is the European Union describing itself, and Mogherini demanding hard power to back up that European empire. So dangerous stuff, and we'd like to help people refocus on the dangers of what the BBC has been up to, we'll say, in the Eastern European region. So this is 2015. And look at the headline: Georgia needs a BBC, an insightful assessment of Georgian media by BBC veterans. Can you imagine anything they need less, Mike?
I'm struggling, I have to admit.
It's pretty hard, isn't it? But here it is. So who's coming out with this? Well, let's get into a bit of the meat. At the end of January, Georgian journalists had an opportunity to participate in the EU-funded Media Neighbourhood programme and to take part in BBC Media Action Training. Now remember that this is, I use the word pernicious for common purpose. It's the same form of perniciousness. BBC Media Action says it's a charity, but if you look at what it does, it is political. So it's taking a long time for the Georgian media to gain the freedom they should have, and I think it's one of the reasons for this is the lack of transparency in media ownership. The EU Media Neighbourhood is a 3-year training programme for journalists, editors and broadcast managers, print and online media. It's funded by the European Union and delivered by a consortium led by BBC Media Action. For 2 days, BBC radio and TV correspondent Jim Fish and the head of projects in the Middle East and Europe, Ellie Howarth, provided Georgian journalists from different regions with training. Georgian Journal had the privilege to speak with both of them about the purpose of the training and to get their own assessments of the media environment in Georgia. And Ellie said, this was an EU project. It was in progress for 3 years and finished here in Georgia. It was something we enjoyed very much. We BBC trainers, along with other media representatives, have been training journalists across 15 countries, including Georgia. You need two things. You need a strong, sensible government that's not afraid of the media, but you also need very strong journalists who can stand up for their own independence. So we can say that the BBC fully embedded into Georgia, another very dangerous trouble spot. BBC in there training journalists to think that BBC in the United Kingdom is an upstanding, moral, independent, unbiased media organisation, when in fact it is the exact opposite. And we can be sure that those young journalists in Georgia have been reframed to believe this nonsense that comes out of the BBC in the United Kingdom. So what comes next? Is it to get the European view now that Russia, of course, is the main threat? These young journalists are simply going to trot out the EU propaganda, because if they don't, they're not going to be paid and they'll be patted on the back by the BBC. It's a political operation. So this is a bit more of what Ellie Howarth has to say. Remember that she's part of a charity. She says that Georgia needs to develop better public service broadcasting. For example, in the UK law, any broadcaster has to broadcast objective news, and BBC is something considered a flagship in this respect. Is this lady on drugs, Mike, I wonder? I think something like this would be very good in Georgia, because if you have a well-developed public service broadcaster, then the others will follow you. Georgia needs a BBC-like model. This is so dangerous because obviously this lady believes her own rhetoric. But what is she saying? Well, if we can get a BBC-type media base into Georgia, we can corral anybody else that might attempt to tell the truth. And who has funded this? The European Union. Who is BBC Media Action working for? The European Union, which of course is still the situation. But if you try and see who this lady is, because of course transparency is one of the foundation stones of the BBC, it seems to be remarkably difficult. I could not find a photograph or an image of this lady. If somebody can help me, I'd be very grateful. But what I did find here with this, the Communication Initiative Network, it's covering the communication and media development, social and behaviour change community. And this is the real danger, that we're not even dishing out just BBC propaganda. The objective is to get in there and to use the applied behavioural psychology to change the way people think and behave in these very volatile Eastern European states. And it goes on. So let's have a look at this one. Thank you very much to another listener who alerted me to this, but the documents, the Eastern Partnership Media Conference. This is the Hilton Hotel in Kiev, 13th of September 2017. People should find this document online very easily. Encourage you to do that, because I can't possibly show you all the names. They went on and on and on. But have a look at the opening here, chaired by Mr. Magarelli, Ambassador, EU Delegation to Ukraine. We've got the Commissioner for the European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement negotiations. We've also got the Deputy Director General of the European Commission, and we've got the former OSCE representative on the freedom of media. So we've got security and media freedom, Mike, drawn into one. I was going to say mixie blob. That's a very old naval expression.
Okay.
It's a dog's breakfast.
Well, I just want to come back to this again. This is the media conference at the Eastern Partnership. Now, this is the 2017 one that you're looking at here. The 2015 one is the one which Andy Price attended, and that was in London. Of course, this has an EU flag on it, but this receives significant funding from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So, you know, Media Action receives money from the European Union and also from the Foreign Commonwealth Office. There's some connection here that we haven't quite got to the bottom of.
Well, we're trying to get to the bottom of it. We've asked BBC Media Action about their funding from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in Ukraine. They don't want to reply. Well, of course, that's normal for the BBC because it's worse than an opaque organisation. So we've now put in a freedom of information request to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office themselves in order to ask how much money was given to BBC Media Action and what the terms of reference were, what the conditions were for that money being given to BBC Media Action. But we've got reason to believe that we won't get this information, Mike, because it seems that everything around Mr. Price is very secretive.
It absolutely is, and we'll have more on the news programme tomorrow on that.
Okay, well, I'll just give you this little extra bit from this particular report on that conference. So this is one part of the text. It says the first part of the event will focus on framing the nexus between democracy and propaganda, not least from non-democratic states, the importance of the media freedom as a central component of democracy, and the role of independent media as a response to propaganda. The second panel will look at the role of donors in assisting independent media, including showcasing select success stories of donor-supported media initiatives. So when they're talking about free press, free media here, most people I can imagine will be sat at home and they'll be thinking this means free, this means not controlled by the government. But in fact, the opposite applies. The European Union's drive is that the media is only free if it's come from the centralised political EU system. And propaganda is anything that anybody else dares to produce which challenges the EU's centralised information system. The irony here, Mike, is that this is a mirror image of the old Soviet system of propaganda. So we're being warned about Russia at the moment, but what we see is the European Union morphing into this. So far from protecting free speech and democracy, the EU is driving propaganda tentacles into every corner of free speech in the eastern states, and the BBC is part of this programme, particularly through BBC Media Action. Where are they going? Total press and media control, because you will not be allowed to challenge the EU in any sense. And here we've got the participation of BBC Media Action itself. So here's Ellie Howarth. This is part of her particular breakout session. Journalist in the modern media landscape, redefining audience engagement and ending old rivalries. Now, ending old rivalries is to get people collaborating.
And this is something we're seeing across the media at the moment. They're ending old rivalries. They're not competing with each other. So the Telegraph is not competing with the Times. The Guardian is not competing with any of the others. They are working together. They're reinforcing each other's narratives. And so they're breaking down any competition. The British media should be referred to the competition regulator, in my opinion, because it's clear that that's what's going on at this point.
Okay, and if we ask questions, I did a little search on BBC Media Action's webpage for Eastern Partnership. They'd been participating in it, so I thought, well, there must be a report. But surprisingly, you come up with 0 search results. So maybe this is some form of denotice or caveat by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that they are paying for BBC Media Action to carry out government propaganda, so they're not going to report exactly what they're doing. Now, if you think it's bad in Eastern Europe, it's even worse in UK, and of course you've led in nicely to that, Mike. Another viewer alerted us to this. This is from the BBC's website itself, so you can find this very easily, but it's talking about, it's boasting about these BBC democracy journalists and how they are now embedded in newspapers and media organisations across UK. So this is the home page. I've had to take a little bit of video to show this because there's so much. We won't stay on it too long. They've got this is the numbers of journalists that they've got all the way across the country. They describe it in regions, of course, because that's the European language, but it's absolutely everywhere. Reach PLC, they've got 23 contracts, Johnson Press, Shetland News, all of the BBC regional areas are involved in the programme. Newcastle Chronicle, Teesside Gazette, it goes on and on and on. Liverpool Echo, Manchester Evening News, Hull Daily Mail, Yorkshire Post. If we let it run, Mike, it would run for another minute. But if you think when you pick up your local newspaper, you're actually looking at something which is independent, no, because stories are now being created, crafted together with these so-called BBC democracy reporters. So the same model of centralised state control that we're seeing being unleashed by the EU in the Eastern European states is actually already in place in this country. And who's behind it? Well, this is one of the names that I've found. So we've got Matthew Barraclough here. He's written articles crowing about how successful this regime is. But as usual, I went to have a look at his Twitter page to see who else he's involved with. And you'll find this little club of journalists basically out of sight to the general public in this country, but they are now deciding what news will and will not be published in any local area. It's Soviet, Mike. This is something which I say with a wry smile on my face, because in the so-called Cold War period, we, the Free West, were supposed to be fighting against those nasty communists that use this type of control system, and yet here is this very control system now coming to light in the UK. It's sinister stuff.
We were going to mention the UN Global Compact on migration, but we're out of time today, so that's going to be knocked back till tomorrow's programme, which is better anyway, because I'm sure David Scott will have something to comment on that. So we'll cover that tomorrow.
We'll end on this. It was sent to me as a graphic. I liked it a lot. But basically, it was somebody who clearly is seeing through the propaganda at the moment. So it's a picture of the Paris riots with a lot of yellow vests and a burning vehicle. And in the foreground, for our listeners, is a gentleman on a horse. He's bare from the waist upward, but he's wearing a yellow vest. And that man is Putin. And of course, what the person is taking the mickey really of the BBC and British wider press is that we've got riots in France. The French can't do it on their own. They're not bright enough to work out that Macron is simply working for the Rothschild bankers. It's got to be Putin. But I thought it was just a wonderful piece of graphic engineering, Mike. So we'll end on a smile. But overall, our news today, I think it is getting more and more serious because, of course, we've got MPs either prepared to stand up in Westminster and simply lie to the nation, or we've got MPs who are so scared that they won't speak out because their own whips have bullied or blackmailed them into silence. This is the pitiful state of Britain in 2018, and that situation is going to continue until the wider public bring these MPs to account. We'll end there. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.